Well, good morning again. This is that day in the church year when we celebrate Christ's transfiguration. Now, here's something for you to think about. Did you know that the Greek word translated as transfiguration is the word metamorphou? How many here knew that? Yeah, hope, okay. From which we get the word metamorphosis. I bet I could invite one of our venture crew members to come up here, and he or she could tell us all about metamorphosis, right? Yeah, I bet you could. I'm not going to, so the pressure's off. Don't worry about it. The dictionary defines metamorphosis as a transformation, a complete change of appearance and form. The best example we have of metamorphosis is the transformation of a lowly caterpillar into a beautiful butterfly. That process has thrilled people through the ages. Butterflies are beautiful and they're fascinating. Many butterflies, such as the monarch, are migratory and capable of long-distance flights. They migrate during the day and use the sun to orient themselves. Because of their striking beauty, butterflies are often seen in works of art. Because of the mysterious process by which they change from ugly caterpillars to beautiful butterflies, they're often seen as a symbol of new life. In ancient times, a butterfly was seen in Japan as a personification of a person's soul, whether they be living, dying, or already dead. But the butterfly can have many meanings. One Japanese superstition says that if a butterfly enters your guest room and perches there, the person whom you love most is coming to see you. In Chinese culture, two butterflies flying together symbolize love. Some people say that when a butterfly lands on you, it means good luck. Maybe some of us need to plant butterfly gardens or spend more time at the Franklin Park Conservatory. There's an old story about two caterpillars who are watching a chrysalis. Suddenly, the chrysalis bursts open to reveal a beautiful butterfly that stretches its wings and flies away. One caterpillar turns to the other and says, "You'll never get me up in one of those things." Well, in the wonderful way that God has created the world, that caterpillar will sooner or later get up in one of those things. I think it's interesting that the term indicating the transfiguration of Jesus should be so close to the term describing the metamorphosis of a butterfly. This can help us appreciate how dramatic the change in Jesus' appearance was on that mountain when he was with his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John. I'm not saying that Christ's transfiguration was anything like the metamorphosis of the butterfly. He certainly didn't sprout wings and fly off the mountain like Superman. But something happened that day. Something his disciples would never forget. You know the story, we just heard it. One day, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up to a high mountain. Suddenly, and quite dramatically on that mountain, Jesus was transfigured right in front of them. Suddenly, his clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could ever bleach them. In Luke's gospel, the word used to describe Jesus' dazzling appearance is the same word that is used to describe lightning. It's an amazing scene. If we can visualize it in our minds, we should experience a sense of awe. It reminds me of a similar scene from the Old Testament in Exodus chapter 34. Do you remember that day when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments? And Moses came down the mountain having been in the presence of God. Quite mysteriously, his face shone so much, reflecting the glory of God, that he had to wear a veil. His face was so radiant that the people were afraid to come near him. That's pretty interesting, don't you think? In the same way, when Peter, James, and John were on the mountain with Jesus, his clothes became dazzling white. But that's not all. Not only did the disciples see Jesus transfigured, but they also saw two of the Old Testament's premier figures, Elijah and Moses. Elijah and Moses were talking with Jesus. Now, this was much more than the disciples could possibly process. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it's good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Mark tells us that Peter didn't know what to say. They were so frightened. That's just so Simon Peter. He never missed an opportunity to open his mouth and plant his foot in it. Maybe if this happened today, Peter would have asked Jesus if he could post pictures of this event on Facebook or Instagram. I can hear him now. "Master, is it all right if I take a selfie?" Peter had no clue what he was saying, and that's all right. This was an event beyond his understanding. And then, as if things had not gotten mysterious enough, a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. "This is my son, whom I love. Listen to him." That reminds me of a knock-knock joke I shared with a couple people. Knock, knock. Two. To whom? What? I heard a groan? What? I don't know about you, but if I heard a voice coming out of a cloud, I'd be ready to beat a hasty retreat. But the 3 disciples were probably already in a state of shock. Jesus transfigured, Moses and Elijah there in their presence, and now this voice from a cloud. It was more than they could possibly take in. Then, suddenly, Mark says, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone then with them except for Jesus. Now that's pretty significant. Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets. After God announces that Jesus is his son, Moses and Elijah disappear, and Jesus alone remains. The law and the prophets have served their time and pass away. But Jesus, who is the fulfillment of both the law and the prophets, remains. What happened on the mountain was a visual representation of what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. The law and the prophets have served their purpose, but the time of the Messiah is at hand." This incident also draws our attention to the Old and the New covenants. A new era is on the horizon. A new dawn is about to break. The Old Covenant, represented by Moses and Elijah, is passing away, and the New Covenant is coming through the death and resurrection of Jesus. This new covenant is the one Jeremiah speaks of. "This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their sickness and remember their sins no more." What a magnificent event this event of the Transfiguration was. And only Peter, James, and John were privy to it. We don't know why this honor was accorded only to them, unless the answer is found in the last verse of Mark's account. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. It could very well be that if the other disciples had been there, they wouldn't have been able to keep the secret. The impact of this event was so enormous that surely one of them would have gone home and said to his wife, that is, if they had a wife, "Honey, this was the greatest day of my life. I'm not supposed to tell anybody, but I'll burst if I don't. If I tell you, though, you can't tell anyone." And the next day, his wife sends a text to her best friend. "I'm not supposed to tell you this, but..." Well, you know how it goes. The salvation story has not run its course. It was essential that some things not yet be revealed. So only Christ's three closest associates beheld his glory on the mountain that day, but they were sworn to secrecy until after Christ's death and resurrection. This was certainly an astounding occasion. The disciples were confronted with Christ in a new and exalted way. But the most important part of that scene was at the end when the voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." The voice that came from the cloud was for us as much as it was for Peter, James, and John. "This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him." Listen to him, first of all, when he says what is critical in life. And what is critical for living the Christ life? You already know. Love for God and love for your neighbor. Everything else in life is of secondary importance to these two commands. We love our neighbor because we love God. And what does such love look like? Let me tell you about a young lady named Hope Stout. Now, we have a Hope here and we have a Peggy Stout here, but I think this is no relation. Yes, when she was 12 years old, Hope was diagnosed with a rare form of bone cancer. And Hope came to the attention of the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And you know about that organization, right? It works to provide joy to children with terminal illnesses. And what a wonderful ministry it is. The Make-A-Wish Foundation contacted 12-year-old Hope about fulfilling one of her wishes. And in a moment of selflessness that is simply awe-inspiring, Hope Stout wished for just one thing. Do you know what it was? Can you guess? That every kid on the Make-A-Wish list would get their wish granted before she did. To me, this is amazing. She wished that every kid on the Make-A-Wish list would get their wish first. Inspired by Hope's example, the organizers at Make-A-Wish kicked into overdrive, raising funds and gathering volunteers to fulfill the wishes of 155 children who were on the list ahead of Hope. They had almost raised enough money to grant every child's wish when, in January 2004, Hope passed away. But her example still inspires the organization even today, and they are working diligently to see that every child gets his or her wish fulfilled as soon as possible. Why did she do it? This little girl could have asked for almost anything in the world. Why did she give it all up for the sake of others? In Hope's selfless, extravagant, loving decision, we catch a glimpse of God's ultimate plan for humanity. Love God, love your neighbor. Listen to Jesus when he says that this is what is critical in life. Also listen to him when he explains who our neighbor is. Not just the people in our family, not just the people in our neighborhood, not just the people who look like us or think like us. Everyone is our neighbor. In a sermon on YouTube, Pastor Gary Miller draws our attention to the books and the subsequent movies, the Hunger Games. Anyone see those movies or read those books? Yeah? If you read the books or seen the movies, you know the plot revolves around a horrible contest fought between young representatives of the 12 dystopian districts. The winner of the Hunger Games is the last one standing as the contestants are forced to kill each other to stay alive. When the authorities come to choose the contestants, one boy and one girl from District 12 for the 74th Annual Hunger Games, the name of Primrose Everdeen, or Prim for short, is plucked from a large bowl containing all the children's names. As the authorities lead Primrose away, her older sister Katniss suddenly intervenes and shouts Prim's name. The guards stop Katniss from approaching Prim, but Katniss shouts, "No! I volunteer! I volunteer! I volunteer as a tribute!" So Katniss becomes the female representative for District 12 in this fight to the death. Now, Katniss provides a moving example of courage and sacrificial love. After all, she voluntarily substitutes herself for another human being. But it's also an understandable substitution. She does it for her little sister. It's admirable, says Gary Miller, was the kind of thing we hope we'd all do for our younger siblings or our children or our spouses. Jesus' substitution doesn't work like that. Whose place does Jesus, the Messiah, take? He takes the place of people like the cowardly disciples, the scheming religious leaders, and the spineless politicians. He takes the place of people like blood-stained Barabbas and the cursing criminal. People are the reason that Jesus has to drink the cup of God's wrath. We are the reason that Jesus is dying. But it's not just us. It's clear from his teachings that he died for the whole world. Everyone is our neighbor. Even our enemies are our neighbors. No one is shut out. Listen to him. Listen to him as he tells us what is critical in living a life of love for God and neighbor. Listen to him as he defines who our neighbor is. And finally, listen to his promise to us. Whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. This is to say that Jesus' transfiguration prefigures what we shall someday be if we give our lives to him. We will be transformed from lowly caterpillars to beautiful butterflies. As someone has said, nature forms us, sin deforms us, the penitentiary reforms us, education informs us, the world conforms us, but only Jesus transforms us. In 1949, John Currier was sentenced to a life in prison. Currier, who could not read or write, was later transferred from prison and paroled to work for a wealthy farmer. In 1968, Currier's sentence was ended, and the records in the Department of Correction show that a letter was written to Currier and to the farmer. But somehow, it never got to either of them. Currier never even knew that the letter existed. A year went by, then another and another. 10 years after Currier's sentence had ended, the farmer passed away. But Currier kept working, serving out his time. He was only given a little money for personal needs, only $5 at first. He slept in a drafty trailer, and he took baths in a horse trough with a garden hose. Life held little joy and no promise for him. But one day, a state parole officer finally learned of Currier's plight and told him about the missing letter. He had lost more than 10 years of his life because he failed to get the message that he had been freed. Have you gotten the message that you've been set free? Have you gotten the message that you can be transformed? Listen to him. Whoever comes to me, I will never drive away. He's talking about you and me. Listen to him. Whoever you are, or whatever you've done, transformation is possible. Listen to him. Quit living like a caterpillar. Allow him to turn you into a beautiful butterfly. We are not called to remain in the state that God has found us, but to feed on his word and to grow. Let him transform you today. Will you please pray with me? Mysterious, wonderful, uncontainable God, you come to us in all of your transforming glory, whether we want to or not. You reveal yourself to us sometimes in the most unlikely places. You transfigure our humdrum, dull, everyday world into the kingdom of heaven. We do not walk away from encounters with you the same as we were before we met you. You warm our hearts and move our lips to praise you. Therefore, we do praise you. We shout hallelujah, and we bend our knee before such glory. Amen.